So, guys and girls, unless you've been living in a cave, you will know that the 2021 changes to the MEG lists and points are out. So we thought we'd do a podcast to go through what these changes are. And tonight, the format's going to be, we're going to look at the list building philosophy. We're going to look at the exact changes, what's happened. We're going to look at the changes to the generals, the changes to skirmishers, the changes to points. We're also going to look at the fact that some new lists have appeared, which is obviously very exciting. And then we're going to look at what's been nerfed. And we're going to focus on the Numidian nerf and the early Archimedes Persian nerf, and have a good moan and see what we can do about it. So without further ado, we will crack on now. Okay, so we're going to move on now to the changes in the lists and new lists. And I think, Richard, you're going to start by just really telling people, maybe for the first time they're hearing this, what are your principles when you're putting these lists together?
Yes, thank you, Ray. So one of the things that people perhaps don't understand when we're drawing up army lists is we generally try and aim for ensuring that when you pick and hopefully will have the correct field. And this is a bit of a tenuous concept, but what we want is that if you fight with a Roman army, it should feel like. If you fight with a Parthian army, it should feel like a Parthian. What we don't focus on so much is supposed historical accuracy, because that is, we want the armies to be as accurate as we can make them, but historical accuracy is a very difficult concept. For example, some troops that carried a short spear, we might not give the short spear characteristic because it doesn't have the right effect that we want. So we're not always gospel driven that if something has a short spear, it has to have the short spear character. And that's what
melee expert might be better explain how they were affected.
Yeah. So we're trying to look at what the results of those troops were, and it's still I think people often underestimate how thin the ancient sources are in terms of describing armies and troops. So that just, however, is an introduction to explain what we're going. So
well, I think in the last podcast on our trip down into China, we realised how thin the what we were relying on was, which was a bit of an eye opener.
Yeah, the challenge isn't made any easier with MEG because there are a lot of different combinations of the characteristics. What with training, armour, the characteristics, the melee was the shooting. There's, I think, in the database that we use to generate the lists, I think there are probably over 2,000 troop types, so in combination appear at some point. It's sometimes quite difficult to keep track of. Anyway, for 2021, the big change, I suppose, is that we've now introduced lists for Maximus, for Magna, and for Pacta. So instead of having 630 odd lists, we've now got 190 lists. Boy, was that that's a dumb move.
But I think people are grateful for it, Richard.
I hope so.
It better be.
I'm going to repeat my moan about that. I keep finding my armies. Only two elements in my tongue. What's going on?
Oh, use the bookmarks. If you use Adobe Acrobat PDF files, there is a bookmark feature. It normally appears, I think, on the left-hand side. Use those bookmarks. That's a quick way to go to the army that you're interested in. And it quite clearly says whether it's in or out. So that's my tip to over. The next big change is we've actually incorporated the points values for the troops into the lists as well. You don't have to go to the army builder to work out how much element of troops. So that was, again, because we start from space, that became...
I've got to interrupt you just quickly. That's something I don't understand. Why the hell would somebody want to sit a pen and paper and work out a list is going to be wrong. You know?
I don't disagree that you perhaps would still want to use the army builder, but sometimes it's quite handy just to see that this troop type costs 122 points. And so you can compare different troop types and what they... And people have provided feedback that says that is really useful, even those who are very spreadsheet savvy, as they describe them. Along with that, we've introduced some general changes which appear in many lists. So just running quickly through those. I've mentioned the no campaign already. Armoured horse troops, cavalry and cavalry are now defined as close. So that makes them a bit cheaper, which counteracts the fact that they move slower and they cannot evade. So that appears consistently throughout the lists. We've also went through and redefined some of the characteristics for horse archers that had the armoured horse characteristic protection. So many of those have now come shoot and charge, so they get the benefit with them. A few we dropped the armoured, but you have to look at those lists. A wider change, and I know we'll come on to this when we talk about the Achaemenid Persians, is we've redefined the Sparabara. So this affects not only the Persians but the other armies that had Sparabara. So they lose the short spear characteristic. Bear in mind with the Pavis, they get a +1 against most troop types at impact anyway. But what we've also done is the front rank is now flexible. So if it's close, they won't suffer the minus against charging. So it means they're not so effective against infantry at impact. But we felt that impact effect was a double counting, both for the short spear and for these cap. And it was getting to where they were beating hoplites.
Am I going red?
That didn't feel right.
It's all right. I'm sure you'll get your say.
We'll come back to that, I'm sure. Running through, another change was for early Italian light cavalry. This is in the classical Italian, where we've reclassified them so they now can be protected. This reflects the sort of Tarentine cavalry that you see in a lot of the Mediterranean armies around the sort of 400, 200 BC period. Another change, which was just getting the feel right, was that scythe chariots and thunderbomb oxen, the expendables now only require one rank to claim the devastating charger characteristic. If you're stampeding cavalry, or cattle rather, you still have to be in 2 ranks because it's the depth of the herd that does the impact. But if you're scythe chariots or oxen with the explosive grenades going on, then you only need 1 rank. And then one of the changes, which actually touches on one of our earlier podcasts, is that we sort of changed the late Byzantine grading so that the troops, and that affects most post-1204 Byzantine, Nicaean, late Imperial Byzantine despots. So those are the most main general changes. Any views on those, guys?
Yes, but I'm keeping my powder dry. Can we? And there are some new lists.
There are indeed new lists. So just to run quickly through those, we've split off Etruscan from the early Roman or Latin, and this is to allow the list to have an option for pylon. I've read various articles of where did the pylon originate, and one of the more plausible theories is the Romans actually borrowed the idea off the Etruscans.
Just as a complete aside, and only for our British listeners, University Challenge, the final, Etruscans beating the Romans was one of the questions.
Well, we can believe it.
There you go.
Yes, and Ray wins today's trivia point.
I got 3 questions right. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
So next one, Gallic Federate Roman.
Yay!
Yeah, Mr. Gorkroger can explain the history behind that one.
It's actually partly Richard's fault for writing his Attila book. I got interested in the Western Roman Empire at the end of the Western Roman Empire. Basically, it's a variant on the Federate Roman. I just felt that the Federate Roman, as it existed, was a bit too broad, and there were enough differences happening in Gaul to make it worthwhile to have a separate list. Basically, remove some of the mounted. It's sort of following the idea that the Roman army north of the River Loire merges and transforms into the Frankish state under Clovis. So it's a transitional between the Romans and the Frankish state. The history is incredibly murky, but it is quite interesting, and it covers a period beloved of many previous war games lists, the alleged Kingdom of Soissons, which, in my view, is a load of old. Yes, Ray has asked us not to swear on the podcast, but this covers that as well. So that's the reason. It's just it's of a regional variant. Richard,
I can argue it's the last Western Roman Empire because it actually postdates the fall of the Roman Empire.
It does. I think that's a very fair description. I think it's an example of what at some point in the future could possibly be done with some more regional stuff. I think some of the sort of, if you like, Dark Ages Byzantine armies could possibly have this. The army in Italy as well. But that's all for the future, and it's all just playing around the edges and just for history nerds, basically.
I'll ask the dumb question, right? So it's less Germanic, more Gallic as a federati Roman army. Is that right?
You're starting to see a merger between a late Roman army and a Frankish.
Right.
So I think you have to be careful because although it's called Gallic Federate Roman because Empire was still in Gaul, Roman province, but the Franks you really should say are a Germanic.
Okay. And I've forgotten what I was going to say. Great, a new list. I'm loving it.
Along with that, we've added 2 extra armies which sort of follow on into this early Dark Age. So we've now got a list for Armorican and early Breton. So this covers the sort of independent Bacordi and the subsequent states that developed into what was later to be the Kingdom of Britain. And we've also got Basque or early Navarrese. So this takes the early Navarrese list back into the period of the Vascones, as they were under the Roman Empire, who become the Basques, and is why we have the Basque language to this day as a non-Indo-European language. Understand which I probably, but Basque language has nothing to do with Spanish, the Romantic. It derives from an earlier Gallic or pre-Celtic in that part, northern Spain and southwest. Another consequence of that is we've revised the Breton list. The Breton list was quite frankly a bit of a fantasy.
Is that the Breton list that you kept using at competitions, Richard?
Yeah, the only the one competition.
Is that the competition that you shouted at me?
Yes, absolutely. And you thoroughly deserved it as well.
Well, that's justified at any time.
Anyway, so the Breton list has fewer of the skilled skirmish and becomes more a sort of I suppose the nearest equivalent is probably almost a cross between an Arthurian late post-Roman British army and with a bit of influence from the sort of Frankish Caroline, how I budget. I see Nick pulling a face.
It was the use of the A word, which I desperately try and avoid.
Where are the Sarmatian Lancers in the list? That's a joke. It's an Arthurian joke.
The only other list I'm going to mention in the new list is Hohenstaufen Sicilian. and apologies if I pronounced that German completely wrong. So this is the period between, and I'm going to get this wrong, aren't I? Angevins and Aragonese. It's sort of 1260 something AD. But for those of you who like your Sicilian, you'll know the dynasty I mean.
Cool. Right, I just want to ask one question about one of the new lists. So it's Nick's favourite Gallic Federati Roman. So that runs to 486, and then you've got a list that I'm looking at the moment, which is early Merovingian Frank, which starts in 485. Is that the same area? Is that the same geography? Is that the same people?
Yeah, Clovis, who I mentioned earlier, is a Merovingian king.
Right. Okay.
He's and whose probable grave was discovered ages ago, a quite rich burial. Yeah, it's seen sort of, certainly in France as the start of France, really.
Yeah.
So it is. Yeah, it is. It just runs on. He essentially takes over that northern Gaul part of what had been the Roman Empire, this sort of semi-Roman empire that existed, and thus took the steps towards the modern state of France.
Cool.
Over the next millennium and a half.
Okay, so let's change tack now, and let's talk about some of the impacts on specific armies that, you know, a lot of us have seen at competition, a lot of us have used, and actually are, you know, pretty popular armies. So the first one we're going to talk about the early Achaemenid Persians, and Paul has used that list since day one, haven't you, Paul? So
pretty much, yeah. Really, really early with hand-drawn dice.
Yeah.
Back in them days.
Yeah, let's have a rant. Let's have a rant about the.
Can I describe the change first? So
no, can we just rant without any knowledge?
Well, you're very good at doing that, I'm sure. But I'll describe the. So we've mentioned the change to Sparabara. So in the Royal Achaemenid Persian army, we're now allowing 12 to 48 Sparabara. This ignores the Iranian Sparabara. So these are the protected, average, and experienced. Up to half of those may be regraded as immortals. So if you regrade them as immortals, they become skilled bow. And then of those, you can take up to one tug of 6 as apple bearers, and they become superior. So that's the sort of fundamental change. The cavalry is basic. So what's your moan?
I don't know if that's a moan, but I think the changes are actually spot on in terms of the actual list. And the shock, the horror.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, I'm just having a heart attack here.
Hang on, didn't we invite you here for profanity and outrageous ranting?
Well, nobody told me that was required in the first place, but no, I think the changes are back to where the list was a couple of iterations ago, where it was basically a chunk of infantry with supporting cavalry, and it worked really well. It felt like I'd imagined a Persian army to be. I think the last iteration was where it went a bit mad. I don't think anybody else really used it apart from me for a while, and then suddenly there was the big wodge of superior skilled immortals, and you didn't need any other infantry, and that was horrific, frankly, for anybody else who got in its way. The list I was using, which was 2 units of immortals as the only infantry, plus Sarka ally, and fill up the rest with compulsory cavalry. It was a cavalry list with some extremely good infantry to go with it, and I think it was unbalanced and gross. And sadly, didn't get to play with it much because that was the beginning of 2020, and it sort of didn't happen, really, did it? Which is a disappointment because I was looking forward to making an awful mess of people with that one. But I think the new version, the new structure in terms of the minimums actually works really well to make sure there is an actual infantry core to the army, which there really has to be. They changed the Sparabara, less sure on. I feel unhappy. I feel unhappy with the loss of the light spear, the short spear. It just feels wrong. I think within the game the actual effect is about right, reducing so it's not doubling up against infantry, but it does change those immortals, the Sparabara, from being a deadly unit to being meh. They're still good, but they're not exciting in the same way as they were. They weren't. They can't. Because the thing is, anything that gets into melee with them is going to chomp them up because there's not much in period that is lacking in any sort of melee capability, apart from other bowmen. They're not, and as the core of an infantry army, they should have something to better make a fight of it. And I think they're going to get run over now. I think infantry are going to go through them. Cavalry always did go through them without even noticing they were there, if anybody actually noticed that. I think people were too scared to send their cavalry in, which was one of the tricks of using it, is people ignoring it with their mounted. Mounted go straight through immortals and spar without even drawing breath. Infantry had a bit of a tougher time. And now I think infantry is going to go through them without drawing breath as well.
Well, the mounted won't have in effect any change, and I still think sending mounted units against skilled shooters is a bit of a against the infantry. I mean, the skill I think is, and this is where I'll introduce my rant, is the ability of archers in general to fall back while shooting, and that's the problem I have. And unfortunately, that sort of is a rule, not a list. And I personally, I still think the Academy Persian is a good arm. These people who put it instantly on eBay to sell it, I think give it a chance first would be my view. But the one concern I have is the ability to fall back and shoot, which
just to be clear for the listener, has not changed.
No, that has not changed. That's still an ability you have. So you tend to see, particularly if you've got drilled archers, that players who are experienced with them tend to fall back while still continuing to shoot. And I just don't feel that you can see that in the accounts of historical battle.
I'd say it just doesn't exist.
Yeah, so if the rules change, then we might make a list change that perhaps swings it the other way.
But let's emphasise there are no plans for rules change.
No plans for rule changes.
Just in case anybody got worried.
For fairness, for balance to mention, pushing through is harder. So, but I know what you mean by if cavalry get in, they're dead.
And cavalry do get in because one round of shooting is not going to stop. Well, it will stop the occasional. Basically, if someone's playing a bit stupidly and sends in one unit of cavalry against an entire line of Spara, it's not going to end well for the cavalry. But if they're playing sensibly and send an actual attack against them, they're gone. I actually took them out to play with the other day. So my second game of the year, second game of an entire year, I think, pretty much. And one unit of Immortals got absolutely chomped by what was by that point 4 bases of infantry and 4 bases of cavalry, both from 6s. They got in, and that was it. They didn't even make it through one phase. One turn, sorry. Blasted on impacts and then finished off in the melee. The front rank being flexible and therefore close and out in the open does mean that the close order foot aren't getting shoved against them, which is actually quite nice and does make them a little bit tougher overall. So I haven't had enough games with them like that to see whether that reduction in the shove from the heavy infantry games into them makes as much difference as I hope. But it is a little bit soft. But they shouldn't be that hard. But they shouldn't be. I feel like they're a little bit softer than they should be. Not a lot, just a little bit.
Do you want to talk us through how you would build your list now in 2021?
Well, the first thing is I'd probably go for the satrapal rather than the rather than the royal, because you can take all your Spara as immortals in the satrap list, because it's in terms of the numbers you can upgrade all 16 of them to immortals, which basically makes them drilled and skilled, which is one of the things that makes them work really well. I've added a couple of units of the Crescent Shield Spearmen because I think they're actually a little bit better than the Spara, a little bit cheaper, and they've got the short spear. Doesn't make a lot of difference, but it feels just a little bit better. Both ranks are the same. They're loose foot all the way through, so you know that they're loose foot all the time. And that, for the other advantage of the Satrapal is you get your 3 units of Sark if you go Eastern in there, so you don't need to take an ally, because the increase in cost of the instinctive ally has made that less tasty than it was.
You've got a lot of moans in one list here.
It's not a lot of moans. It's a change. It's a change. I don't know whether it's am I moaning? Am I moaning?
No, not really.
No. Then the guard and a couple of reigning cavalry and some light horse, and it was quite a good list the other day. In fact, I can't see a lot I would change about it at the moment. But I think I'm trying to make it the same as the list I was trying to use at the beginning of the year. And I'm thinking actually maybe it might be better to go back to what was an older version of that sort of list and shove in the frankly rubbish hoplites to give that little bit of cavalry resistance. They are frankly rubbish hoplites because they're either tribal and combat shy, or formed and poor. Neither of which is particularly tasty. Cheap, sadly unmaneuverable, but add like the equivalent of shoving a couple of stakes in front of your longbows. They're there to make it less tasty for the cavalry to come charging at them out of nowhere, but it does reduce the maneuverability of the whole unit. I probably wouldn't go for a hoplite ally, as tempting as that is, because I think it just becomes a hoplite army. So
too expensive.
It is, and especially now they're so expensive now to get those allied generals. I mean, the talented allied generals, that's not happening.
We just play the odds and take a competent.
Play the odds for one-off game, maybe, but at a tournament, I think you're just asking for trouble.
Sorry.
And the other thing as well, back to the Royal one, I can do the same version with the Royal one with the extra infantry, and that works quite well. It's quite nice having those exceptional guard cavalry, which are. Is that the only compulsory exceptionals in the entire game? I think they might be.
I think you could be right.
Yeah. So you feel it's nice to have those, and if you're going to have exceptionals,
you can of course downgrade them.
Yes, but why would you? Downgrade them to unskilled shooters, which is something that feels really wrong. Sorry, I have another whinge about the list, but that's the only thing that feels wrong is that the Persian prestige weapon being the bow. I would have thought more, rather than the immortals being skilled, it'd be more likely to be the guard cavalry that's skilled, because they're the gentlemen, their prestige weapon of their bow. They're the ones who are more likely to be able to shoot the eyes out of a gnat than the guardsmen. But that's my thinking. But it's not. I'm not the list writer.
I tell you what, those guard cavalry, they're compulsory. You wouldn't leave home without them, even if they weren't compulsory. As far as I'm concerned, I think they're a fantastic unit.
Yeah, they are. They are. Stick them with a mediocre general and just
find a target and smack them.
Yeah. They're as good as lancers and much more points effective.
And can evade if they have to.
Yeah, which confuses people.
Really confuses.
I have to say, I was going to say the Caymanid as a only ever been on the other side of the Caymanids, playing them. My thoughts were the changes probably make the army a bit more difficult to use, especially in an open competition. And I think it's open where the lack of the short spear against infantry would hurt more. I'll be a lot happier putting my Roman legionaries into them than previously, because basically they're getting an extra claim.
Yeah,
I think it probably does balance them against Greek hoplites, and I suppose in principle you balance them against their historical opponents first and foremost. But I do think it makes the army more difficult, especially if you go for an infantry heavy version where you don't have that big long line of skilled shooters. You've got fewer of them, so it does make it makes it a bit more difficult to use.
In an open competition, I expect to see more mixed cavalry version, just along the line of.
Yeah, I think the one Paul just described, which I think actually I played against at the beginning of last year at Hammy's place, didn't it? Yes,
you did. And
ended up charging some immortals in the rear. Not sure I did anything to them when I did it, but we had units all over the table. But I think that version of the army is the more open competition version.
Sadly, that's the one I can't quite scrape out of the list now. Have to have more infantry. No, it's more sensible as a list, but it's less blatantly wrong. I think it's probably the.
I played against your Saka ally Persian. I thought it was excellent. But Nick, just for balance, I remember playing with my Persians against your Romans, and my infantry chewed up your infantry, and it was just like I was like, that shouldn't have happened. I had a different plan, but I just chewed you up anyway.
Yeah, I mean, as I remember, you had one absolutely brilliant round of shooting. It was as I was charging you, if I remember rightly. I think I'd basically come through your shooting. I had 4 units or so of legionaries with a talented general. The CNC was floating, so pushing cards onto them, so we could push through the shooting. We could take wounds off. We had the cards to push through the shooting on the charge, but some of the units in the line were average, because you can't have them all as superior or better, and basically the ones on the one end of the line got absolutely shot, to insert swear word of your choice in there, and that just opened it up. Yeah. and then I think you basically caused enough damage with your shooting on that final charge that the white dice o' doom kicked in, and despite the superior melee expert, wasn't enough.
I know.
But it really was a game that could have gone either way. It could have gone either way.
And I roll really rubbish dice, so it just didn't feel right that my rubbish dice and rubbish troops completely eviscerated your Romans.
Yeah. I think you just had the one turn. You had the one turn of lucky shooting, but that was enough.
Yeah,
this
exactly.
Is why I end up shouting at him, because he claims he has rubbish dice, then rolls a string of skulls.
Yes.
but that one, I suppose. So if we'd have played that game 10 times, maybe that would be the only time I would have won.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, it was a good game.
It was a good game. Let's move on. Let's move on, because
Can we move on to your Numidian?
Right.
Right.
So I want to set the scene here. Not everyone knows, but I gave up painting armies a long time ago, and then during lockdown I decided to start painting again, and with the help of contrast paints managed to paint some fairly decent. And all of the armies that I painted or acquired during lockdown have Numidians. So I painted what I think are a very nice looking late Republican Roman army with a Numidian. I painted a list completely stolen from Nick, which was early Carthaginian with a Numidian ally. And then I managed to acquire from Matt Hayward an absolutely beautifully painted Pompeian Numidian army. Okay, so I think I can safely say that I am the beneficiary of the Numidian nerf bat. Thank you very much. So that's really why I'm annoyed, not because anything about it, whether it's right or wrong, because what's right or wrong got to do? It's whether, I just feel like, come on, guys, give me a break. All this painting, and now I've got to change.
That what you've got there, the late Republican Roman with Numidians is going to be almost your perfect storm of problems.
Right.
Because you've got professional generals in the main army.
Yep.
You've got a talented, instinctive ally that goes up. You're not saving any points as you might do, as you probably find you do with your early Carthaginian, because I've looked at this, obviously, you took my army list. You save some points on the instinctive generals there, which offsets the ally going up. So you're not getting the offset, and then you've got your sugs are 13 points a base more for your Numidians because of the increases there. So the Republican Roman is almost certainly going to be one of the hardest hit in that respect.
Yeah, especially if you take your fortified camp for free.
Oh, is that
which is where the problem is?
Oh, it's a classic Roman problem. Yeah, because looking at the early Carthaginian, because I've got the same army, you save points on some of your generals. My version's got Balearic slingers in it. You save some points on those because they've got cheaper, which offsets a great deal of the increased cost in the Numidian skilled shooting sugs. Plus, there were some points left over. I wasn't exactly at 10k, so you're only looking at 100 and something on that one.
Yeah.
So it is a case of that is going to be your late Republican Roman is going to be very badly hit, and your Sertorian Spanish, of course, is in a similar boat, isn't it? Professional generals.
Yeah, the Pompeian Numidian.
Yeah, sorry, the Pompeian Numidian. Yeah.
Because I tell you what, the thing about that list is because there's so much stuff in it. You can just change a few things like the compulsory foot skirmishers, make them poor. There's stuff you can do.
Yeah,
it's a big army anyway,
yeah.
And also you can jiggle around with the generals there because you're not worried about PBS and scouting because you've got more PBS and scouting that why do you want any more? So as long as you can control the army with the command and control, you can have 4 competent generals. And I think that's a better mix anyway for the army. So I'm not worried about that because there's so much. It's the fact that this, I think you've hit the nail on the head. So the late Republican Roman army with the Numidian ally is such a tightly pointed army and well crafted and honed to get it there, that if these points go up, well, I don't know. I don't know how to solve the problem on this, especially now that I've realised I've got a fortified camp as well.
No, the Pompeian Numidian, which doesn't have to have a fortified camp.
No. We're looking at the late Republican Roman.
Oh, sorry.
In Spain, and going on at So yes. So I think it's personally, I think it's back to the drawing board with the late Republican Roman.
I say probably is the one that's most hard hit. I've also seen just a normal Numidian, not a Pompeian Numidian, and I think that it lost a SUG, not a skilled shooting SUG. It was about the net effect after the generals' reductions and paying. Yeah. So if you've got a Numidian army, you're probably okay. As you say, if it's one of those, if it's big, you can lose a unit somewhere. Yeah. It's not going to break the army.
Especially a SUG.
Yeah, you lose an experienced shooting SUG or something, which saves you. But that Roman is going to need some. That's a back to the drawing board one, and that's going to be a look at the basic concept and work from that, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's a shame because 2 things, Richard, why it's a shame. I'm putting all the blame on you. One, I spent hours and hours and hours painting it. I've never actually used. It's a shame. And 2, with the Numidian ally, it was a really good army.
I faced it when Stephen Stead used it. It's a nice combination.
It's a way to fix the ally to downgrade the nobles, either downgrade them to average or turn them into just cavalry. That'll give you a similar sort of number of points as the old version.
Yeah.
Same sort of size, still sort of fairly standard. Most people take the ally exactly the same, don't they? 1 nobles, 1 cavalry, 2 skirmishers.
Yeah.
They take the cavalry, do they?
You have to take 1 of the cavalry. I think you have to take 1 cavalry and 2 skirmishers.
Is it an earlier version that doesn't? I can't remember.
I don't think the nobles are compulsory, but so you could take those as cavalry rather than nobles, or just downgrade them to average.
Yeah.
Have a similar sort of impact.
I mean, I remember playing Lance. So I had I had an army with loads of tribal foot, and he just put his cavalry and best light horse in front of them and just shot them away. I mean, that was it. They were gone. Four tugs gone. It took some time, but it didn't matter because I wasn't going to catch him and I wasn't going anywhere. So I just thought it was a very good army. And then having the really good foot as well. But hey, maybe sometimes you just have to suck it up and see that 2 of your armies, your Persian and your Romans, will never come out of the or be on eBay tomorrow.
I do think that's an overreaction.
No, actually, my conclusion to draw it in, this is a personal view, even though you could say that I've suffered because every army I bloody painted is now been nerfed. My actual overriding feeling is there's nothing you can't cope with that we've talked about apart from, I think, that late Republican Roman army is back to the drawing board.
Yes, and I'm sure there's still a good army in there.
Yeah,
it's it is, but it is just hit a lot. But I still go back to the stuff we talked about a lot earlier in this podcast. Those Numidian cavalry did need a change.
Actually, Paul, you're right. If you change, to just get back into the podcast rather than summing up, just simply changing the nobles from superior to average. And to be honest, if the Numidian nobles are superior and you need them to be superior, you're more than likely using them for the wrong thing. Yeah. So okay. So then I got to find 62 points. Hey ho, I'm sure I can do that.
I would think so, somewhere along the line. But yeah, it's you do. I think you have been unfortunate with that selection of armies. Have all come along. They've all been clobbered.
But maybe it's justice that I selected those armies because cavalry, skirmisher, average, unprotected, skilled javelin were really, really good.
They're still going to be really, really good.
Yeah, I know.
Maybe it wasn't coincidence. Maybe I just look at his armies and nerf them.
But in my Pompeian Numidian, for example, I'm not losing even. I don't lose 1 SUG of best light horse. So I've still got the skilled javelin in there. So, and I think that's a great army because I tell you why I think that's a great army. My final point on that is that I've heard that Simon Elliott and he was playing Alistair Harley, who we know is a very, very, very good wargamer, very good MeG player. And Alistair sat there. He said he sat there for 25 minutes thinking, what the bloody hell am I going to do against this? So any army that could do that to Alistair has got my vote. So, Nick, can you teach me how to use skirmishers, please?
If you haven't worked it out by now, mate, you just charge them straight at my army.
Yeah.
That's not going to work, is it?
You've got to be really patient with skirmishers.
Patience. Learn when to skirmish, when to run away. You can stagger your units, one closer than the other. So if it's charged, it runs away. The next one can then shoot at the chargers, hopefully if you've got it right, and may just skirmish and then rinse and repeat. So do that. It's got fire teams falling back.
That's when you're playing them really well. Is getting the benefit of shooting charges from troops that otherwise would be out.
And it is, I always say it's practice. It is practice, and you will take some big lumps along. So.
Yeah, maybe that'll stay in the book.
No.
So what? Just to have a little bit of hobby stuff, then, guys, before we leave you. So, what's everyone working on at the moment?
I'm actually using an army that's had some changes on it. The Khitans, the Liao Chinese dynasty, who have got quite a lot of protected armoured horse guys. So you remember Richard was saying earlier about they're now close formation, just for the points thing, but they've got shoot and charge has been brought in. So armoured horse, shoot and charge, experienced bow, mounted polearm. I think it's quite a nice combination.
But they only move 4.
They only move 4. They can't evade, unlike other troops if they were loose formation, just protected. But it's a bit different. The mounted polearm can give shatter, and it's effectively melee expert in the combat phase. So it's quite a good value troop type. And it just makes it it's just a bit interesting. I've always had an interest in that army for some reason, probably because it was just a bit obscure. The only other person I know who's got an interest in it is Matt Hayward, and so who we've mentioned before. So I bought a load of Khorasan Mongol figures, made some small changes to them to make them look a bit more like Khitan, because I don't think anybody makes a proper Khitan figure, and they were the nearest I could find after some discussion on the Society of Ancients forum. Duncan Head was very, very helpful. So it'll be interesting to see how that army works. I don't think it'll be a world beater, but interesting.
So, Paul, I noticed you were doing some painting earlier. What are you working on?
First time in absolutely ages. I'm doing an early Fatimid army. Similarly, looking at all the numbers, trying to work out what the best troops are. Short spear, melee expert are the best by far in terms of value, bang for buck. So a whole bunch of those. Was it Abid? Is that? I don't know what the apostrophe in the front means. That you have to have what you're supposed to pronounce for that. But those Abid troops look pretty good with melee expert short spear with a bunch of two-handed cut and crush, and long spear cavalry is pretty decent as well. Not quite as good value as mounted polearm, but still pretty good.
They usually come unprotected, those long spear cavalry in Arab armies.
Oh, not these ones.
Oh, okay.
Even though I think even unprotected actually pretty decent with the long spear counting all the time. Yeah,
but this is where you go stato, isn't it? And you tell me. I remember you and I had a discussion about how if I put an army together of Normans where all the cavalry was in tugs of 4, it would be awesome because of the multiplier effect of some coefficient. Yeah. And I put it on the table and it got absolutely walked over by a piece of paper.
Yeah, it sometimes happens like that. I tried Spartiate's downgraded average the other day for a similar reason of being extremely points efficient, long spear, melee expert. But I took the exceptions because I thought their exceptional works out quite good value as well. If you look at Will Denham's blog, his game against me, and the exceptionals didn't even last a whole turn in combat. They got completely blown away in one round. because they lost a couple of bases on impact, and they go from being absolutely brutal to completely useless.
So we could ever describe exceptionals as completely useless.
Well, okay. Admittedly, they were on +5 in melee, straight up. Unfortunately, rolled double S. So,
Okie dokie.
So, Richard, what are you planning? I won't talk about painting or modelling or anything like that. What are you planning at the moment?
Well, as I mentioned last time, I'm planning the Battle of Bosworth. Battle Day. I'm rather relieved I'm not spending all my time correcting the army list. The errata is pleasingly modest.
So I think are we all going to Hammy's tournament in Battlefield Hobbies? Yeah.
Oh yes.
In July, we're all going. Yeah. And listener, if you haven't bought your ticket, buy it, please. So middle of the country, no excuse. So I noticed that it's 500 BCE to 500 CE, isn't it?
It is.
So the early Merovingian Franks squeak into that. So I've been actually drooling over this list because infantry, tribal close, average protected, short spear, dev chargers. You know, there aren't many of those left in the. They're pretty damn good, right? And then it's got it's got a load of cavalry to go with it. So I'm going to have a little look at that list and see whether that can be a replacement for my. Oh, what was that list I used to use that was completely nerfed? The one that's
the Great Tungi.
Yeah, the foot lost their short spear and the cavalry lost their ability to evade. Oh, yeah, that will be my Grathingi. So there's a theme emerging here. Ray gets a list, likes it, it gets nerfed. And on that low note...
No, it's actually in the list writer's job description. Yeah. Could I just on the Hammies one, could I just point out, because I think a couple of people have missed this, it's 500 to 500, but there's no geographical limit.
Right.
It's not
any PDF.
It's not a quote classical sort of Greeks Romans thing.
So if you want to take your early Mesoamerican army, there's your opportunity to do so.
Indeed.
So good luck.
Yes. Well, there'll be lots of variety in that 500 to 500, I would imagine.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll see some new faces there.
Yep.
Not just the same old lags.
A couple of new people have booked. Right. So we've dribbled on and we've come to the conclusion that there are changes for 2021, but they're never as bad as you think. So get on with it, build your list, paint a different tug or sug, put your army back together, except for late Republican Romans with a Numidian ally. Might have to go back to the drawing board one, but everything else is a few changes. That's my conclusion. Right.
Yeah, I think it's no bad thing to keep the brain ticking over on your armies. Just keeps things moving. Bit of variety.
I did have a question for Paul, actually. So the listener may not know that Paul, he's well known for he's been a statistician, but he actually produced the ranking. And are we going to get those up and going again?
Oh, yes. As soon as we've got some games in, I'll reset. I think we'll just start again from scratch with the official release at the beginning of 2020. We were going to anyway. So we'll get rid of Alistair, basically. And,
yeah, Alistair, who I think is still ahead of me, but only has 3 scores that count, which really hurts. That really.
Yeah. No, as soon as we have some games in, I'll keep track of it. So anybody who arranges any competitions, anything with a decent number of players, so a decent number of games, so like more than 2 games and more than 4 players, send me the results and I'll shove them into the system. And
cool. So I think that means that although I did notice today that the shout out to the Greek MEG community, who I think are organising a competition in April. It's fantastic. Not quite sure how that works, but maybe their COVID is very low. But I think we'll be back with some things in June. I think will be our first, is my opinion. I don't know if anyone's planning anything earlier, but I think something in June to trouble the scorekeeper. Right. Well, Paul, thank you very much for joining us. And as always, anytime. Thanks to the podcast regulars. So, chaps, see you very soon. See you over a table very soon.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it.